Hi everyone, bonjour. Hope you're doing great. I hope the weather is sunny wherever you might be in Canada. Here in Ottawa, it's been raining nonstop for the past hour. At least it's good for the garden. I hope everybody's having a great Tuesday, great Canada Day week. J'espère que tout le monde va bien. Je suis bien contente de vous voir. So welcome to the virtual learning series for the Federal Youth Network. And especially welcome to today's segment on leveraging SMART for setting future goals. Donc, bienvenue à tout le monde pour la séance tirer profit de SMART. I'm Raphaël Robidou. I'm going to be your host today. I work for the Public Service Commission, and I'm the Youth Engagement Ambassador. So I help manage the Emerging Leaders Network, which is the equivalent of our Young Professionals Network over there. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I'm joining you is the traditional and ceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Algonquin people have lived on this land since time immemorial, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory. So I would like to invite you, if you're not located in the NCR, to take a few moments to reflect about the land from which you are working today. So as we move through today's session, please share your comments in the chat space, and you can also ask questions either by putting them directly in the chat, or you could use the Q&A button in the language of your choice. So feel free to ask questions in either French or English. And you can vote for questions that other people have asked and that you'd like to see answered by clicking on the thumbs up button, so you can have a bit of a crowdsourcing vote that way. Donc, au fur et à mesure qu'on progresse aujourd'hui, vous pouvez partager vos questions soit en anglais ou en français. Most of the session today will be in English, but there will be some small sections in French. I'll mostly be summarizing what I've said in English and French. And then, of course, if you would like to interact with me in the chat, feel free to do so, as I've said, in the official language of your choice. This could be a bit of an informal French practice for you as well, if you've been trying to learn. So thank you for joining us today. Merci d'avoir été des nôtres aujourd'hui. So on that note, we're going to get started feeling excited for this workshop. So Josh, if you don't mind putting up the PowerPoint on the screen. And on that note, shout out to Josh and Marcella for taking care of the technical aspect of things today. It's so nice not to have to be sharing my own screen. So this should be coming up in a few minutes for you. Oh, that's a bit too big. If you don't mind, maybe minimizing the window. Oh, that's perfect. Wonderful. So we can move to the next slide. Thank you so much. And you should be able to see a poll question. Donc, votre première question de sondage about goal setting. So thank you, Marcella. You might see that the poll function just popped up on your screen with the question. So goal setting, have you tried it? And you have a few options here. Either you've tried it, didn't work so well, you've never tried it, or maybe you would like to create your own answer, in which case feel free to write it down in the chat. So you can vote. Take your time to think about maybe the past 6 months or however long you've been working in your position. If you're a summer student, maybe you've only just joined the public service, in which case you could think about personal goals as well in your own life outside of work, maybe at school. So how do you feel about goal setting? Is that something that's important to you? Is that something that you do regularly? Or maybe you're here today because you'd like to learn about it and get to know a bit more about this because you're more of a go with the flow type of person. Oh, so we have the results coming in, and I see it's fairly evenly split, actually. So we have about a bit more than a third of you who've never tried it, and a bit more than a third who have tried it, didn't work out so well. So I see maybe there's some tips and tricks we can share to help facilitate that whole goal setting process. I know it's not always easy. You're right, Melanie, very important to have goals. Nicole is saying that she does have set goals. She does it regularly, but she'd like to know more about the SMART model. So I'm really glad to hear that. Having that kind of framework can really help make goals more attainable as well. I don't know about you, I always try and set goals at the beginning of the year. So on January 1st, I'll have resolutions. Maybe some of you are also team resolutions. It never works. So I probably should get on that SMART bandwagon and try and apply that to my beginning of year resolutions. They tend to revolve around being more punctual, that never does happen, as I've mentioned. But recently, I've set myself the goal of being more relaxed about not being on time. That's been working out a tiny bit more. Donc, merci de partager vos réponses. C'est bien apprécié. Thank you, everyone. If you don't mind, we'll be moving to the next slide, Josh, please. Thank you. So setting goals, as you know, is a very valuable skill, especially being able to set smart goals that you'll be able to achieve, realistic goals. So in the next hour together, we're going to explore what effective goal setting is and how to implement your plan for a goal. So before we go any further, I would like you to write down one goal that you would like to achieve. So this goal could be professional, could be personal, could be about your family, about working out, about eating better, could be about traveling, finances, you name it. I'd just like you to take a minute to reflect on a specific goal that you have for the next 6 months or so. So there's no rules, no parameters, just write down one goal. So we're going to give you maybe 2 minutes. We're going to give you 2 minutes. So by 1:40, we're going to get back with our next steps. But for now, feel free to just take a moment and think about what you'd like to accomplish in the next 6 months. One goal. So you might want to write it down somewhere. It's always helpful to have this written reminder as well. And you're going to have that to track back to after the workshop today as well. So it's going to be a bit more of an accountability procedure in this sense. And I'm going to write my own goal so I can do this whole process with you guys. So I hope everyone had a chance to reflect and write one goal. So my own goal, the one I wrote, was to run a half marathon. I hope that's going to work out. I've been running for a few years and I'd like to get to the next level. If you would like to share your goal as well, feel free to write it down in the chat. And over the next 30, 40 minutes or so, we'll be working on that goal to streamline it and make it even more achievable using the SMART framework. So if you'd like to share your beginning product, feel free to write it down. Josh, if you don't mind moving to the next slide. So what is your single biggest challenge with goal setting? So we've just set a goal for ourselves. Maybe as you were writing your goal, you thought, this is not going to work out because this reason, that reason, something that's maybe stopped you in the past, something that's been an issue for you in the past. So we're going to just take a moment to reflect on what's been keeping us from achieving our goals or setting goals in the first place, even in the past, by answering the poll that Marcella just kindly put up for us. So, what's your single biggest challenge? Quel est votre plus grand défi en matière de vous fixer des objectifs, soit personnels ou professionnels? Is it that you have no time, vous n'avez pas le temps de les accomplir, you don't know how to reach them, maybe a lack of follow-up, so you have a lot of enthusiasm at first and then it kind of wanes. I'm not sure how that's going to work, so you have a goal, you don't know how to get there, kind of overlap with the second option there, but maybe it's more like not knowing, not having the knowledge or the specific know-how, and then maybe too difficult or time-consuming. So you have a goal, but it's maybe a bit too ambitious. Donc, vous pouvez choisir votre option. Je sais que c'est tentant de choisir toutes les options. I kind of want to check all of those options, but maybe the single biggest challenge you've experienced. Ooh, so this is less evenly split than the first poll. I see that a lot of you are saying there's been a lack of follow-up. So I completely get that. That kind of reminds me of the example I gave you guys at the beginning of this workshop about resolutions. You may or may not know that about 80% of New Year's resolutions actually fail after a month. So by February 1st, about 80% of individuals who set New Year's resolutions they no longer follow them. And so this kind of goes back to this idea of lack of follow-up. I feel like one of the biggest challenges that we all experience is once that initial burst of motivation is over, how do we keep on going? How do we make sure that reaching our goal becomes part of our daily routine? And I see a lot of you have also said, I'm not sure it's going to work, or maybe it's too difficult or time consuming. So again, kind of having that clear path forward and having those really defined next steps that you can reach without necessarily spending too much time wondering how you're going to get to the next step. Donc, je suis bien contente de voir que vous ressentez le besoin d'être ici aujourd'hui. Really glad to see that you feel those challenges as well, that you've experienced them. Thank you for sharing, Georgina. That's amazing. Finished art installation. Wow. I'd love to see that installation once it's done. You're probably going to have a few people here you'd love to attend the exhibition that you're putting on. So if you don't mind, Josh, moving to the next slide, we're going to be talking a bit more about SMART. So SMART is actually an acronym, as you might know. It's been largely attributed to Peter Drucker, so who was the first one to come up with the acronym, but it's been widely used since Drucker first popularized it. And so setting SMART goals really means that you can clarify your ideas, use your time productively, and increase your chances of achieving what you want in life. So it's kind of that, that framework that helps you make sure that the goal you've set is both specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So I'm going to be kind of walking you through all of those specific steps. But what I'd like you to do so far, I'm sure it's going to be amazing, Georgina. What I'd like you to do so far is to hit the raise hand button if you have a goal in mind. So if you've been writing down a goal, just click on the raise your hand button. So that's going to be at the bottom of your screen. You should be able to see the function for the raise your hand. And so if you have a goal, I would just like you to hit that button. You don't have to actually speak, so no worries there. But we're going to be using that as a tracking tool. So I'm going to be taking you through those letters one by one. And every time you feel that the goal you set initially does not necessarily meet the criteria or the parameters that have been established by that letter, you're going to lower the hand that you've raised. And so we're going to start with a lot of hands raised. And as we move through the acronym, we'll see how many of us can keep their hands raised and feel that their goal actually meets all of those objectives that go with all of the letters. So it's going to be a bit of a way for us to keep track of everything. All right. So I see we have 25 raised hands. That's pretty good. Let's see how many of those we can keep raised. And if you find that you lower your hand as you go through the process, don't get discouraged. This is also meant to be an awareness raising exercise. So if you do find that at a specific letter, you can no longer keep the hand raised, then that might be an indication that you might want to think a bit more about that specific parameter and make sure that your goal is in alignment with what we've been discussing today. Parfait, parfait. Donc, je vous invite à lever la main si vous avez votre objectif. Et alors qu'on passe à travers les lettres, on va baisser la main si on réalise qu'il y a une des lettres qui ne correspond pas nécessairement à notre objectif. So, moving on to our first letter, which is going to be S. So, I'm sorry, I see there's a bit of a cutoff at the bottom of the screen, but I can let you know what's at the very bottom. Oh, and I see Melanie is sharing with us. My goal is to have a permanent full-time with finance or HR. That's amazing. Caroline is saying my goal is to lose weight. Those are really, really great goals. And I like the variety, the diversity of goals that we see. So some of you have more personal goals. Some of you have more professional goals. And so you'll see that the SMART framework does apply to any area of your life. Merci beaucoup de partager avec nous. So about specific, your goals should be clear and specific. Otherwise, you won't necessarily be able to focus your efforts, and you may not feel as motivated to achieve it because it's going to be tougher to know when you have achieved it if it's very vague, very broad. So when you're drafting your goal, what I'd like you to do is to try to answer the 5 W questions. You've already kind of written down a first draft of your goal, so maybe you want to think about whether that goal meets those 5 W questions as we go through them. So first W question is who, qui. So consider who needs to be involved to achieve the goal. Is it only you, or will there be other people involved? And if so, you might want to mention those other people. Then you have what. So think about exactly what you're trying to accomplish. Don't be afraid to get very detailed. Then when, and we'll be discussing the when a bit more when we get under time bound. So I know at first I said within the next 6 months, but maybe your goal is going to take less time than that. Maybe you have a specific timeline in mind. And so you do want to make sure that you have this clear expectation of when in the future you'll be reaching your goal. So you can work backwards from there and set smaller goals to get there. And then finally, you have where, which, and why. So where the question may not always apply, especially if you're setting personal goals, because you kind of take yourself everywhere. So if your goal is to lose weight, for example, it doesn't matter where you are. But if it's location relevant, so for example, you'd like to be employed at a specific location or for a specific department, then you can make that specific. And then which, so determine any related obstacles or requirements. So which enablers, which barriers. And then finally, why? So that's what's cut off at the bottom of the screen. What is the reason for the goal? And so you might find it's helpful to think about the why, because we might sometimes have goals that are not necessarily goals that we would like to set for ourselves, but maybe goals that other people have for us, right? And so when we start to think a bit more about the why, we might find that some of the goals that we've set don't necessarily meet our expectations or values or dreams. And we really want to make sure that the why that we set for our goals is in line with how we want to live our life more globally. You may have heard the saying, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And I find that this does resonate, especially when goal setting. You want to make sure that the goals you're setting reflect the kind of life that you want to be leading. So I know that's a lot of questions. I'm going to give you an example so you can kind of situate it a bit more. So imagine that you're currently a student. Some of you may already be students. You work in admin, right? So maybe you work for a director, you manage calendars, you manage invoices, and so on. And you'd like to move into HR, say. So a specific goal for you could be, I want to gain the skills and experience necessary to become a staffing specialist within my organization, and then the why, so that I can build my career and lead a successful team within the next 4 months. So that could be your goal. If you want to add other people, maybe you specifically want to get involved as a staffing specialist within your actual team. So then your goal could be, I want to gain the skills and experience needed to become a staffing specialist so that my current manager promotes me within my organization. So that could be a piece you'd like to add. And then setting a goal, for example, to become a better runner. So going with a personal example is kind of vague. But setting a goal to run a mile within a specific amount of time, now that's a lot more achievable and attainable because you know exactly what you want to do. So again, for example, if your goal is to lose weight, maybe instead of saying I want to lose weight, you could be saying I want to lose 5 pounds or 10% of my body weight or what have you. Or maybe instead of saying I want to be more accomplished, I want a promotion, maybe you could say I want to go from an EC2 level to an EC3, right? So you could make that even more specific as you go. So if you find that what you've written is not necessarily that specific, I would like you to lower your hand if you don't mind. And feel free to have a look, of course, at what you've written and see how you might want to make it more specific. Oh, and I see Jenny is writing down a very specific goal in the comments. So yay, there you go, Jenny. So my goal is to lose 20 pounds in order to be eligible for testing to see if I'm compatible to give a kidney to my dad. That's amazing. That's very generous of you. So I see that some of you have been lowering their hands, but we still have a good number of attendees. Thanks. Should I reward it to be more specific? You can, absolutely, you can. So maybe instead of finishing the art installation, you might want to think about the specific actions you're going to take in order to finish it, right? So what specific steps do you want to take? Is that going to be you yourself, or is there going to be a team involved? Do you have a timeline in mind? So you might want to add those elements in there. And that can be very helpful in terms of making sure that your goal is something you can visualize. That's a tip I like to give. Make sure you can actually visualize the goal that you've set in your mind. So if your goal is to become a better person, say, that's pretty hard to visualize, right? But if your goal is to be able to give compliments to your friends every day, or to be able to volunteer at the local organization, for example. That is a very clear goal that you can actually see in your head, right? So you do want to make sure it's specific enough that you can have a clear image of what it's going to look like once you reach that goal. So I'm going to give you just a minute to rewrite your goal if you feel that you'd like to add a bit more specific elements to it. It might get long. That's perfectly fine. And don't feel like you have to add an answer to every single of those questions, but you do want to make sure that most of them have been considered. So you may not be writing down anything, but you've thought about it and you've decided whether or not it should be included. Puis, Josh, if you don't mind just moving to the next slide, that's going to be the same one in French. Donc, si vous aimeriez avoir les questions en français, sont ici. Donc, qui est concerné, qu'est-ce que j'essaie d'accomplir, où, quand, quel facilitateur ou obstacle et pourquoi. Donc, votre objectif doit être clair et précis autant que possible. Lose half a pound in 3 months. I love that. That's great. And then you can think about the reason for it as well. Is it because you want to maybe feel stronger in your body? Is it because you'd like to be able to run faster? So you might have different reasons. And when you really have that why that's clear in your head, it might be a lot easier to stick with a goal as well because you have that motivation. That's amazing. It's so great to see that there is a community, basically, like all of you supporting each other. That's great to see, sharing your goals like that. In a way, you can kind of tell yourself, once you've shared it with us, we're kind of like your accountability buddies, right? We're going to help motivate you and cheer you on. So if you haven't had time yet to specify your goal, feel free to come back to it after the workshop as well. I'm going to give you just a few pointers for the S, if you don't mind moving to the next slide, Josh. Just a few different actions. Yeah, you're right, Melanie. It's not always easy to think of the specific. We tend to have kind of that big picture goal, right? So it may take some time for you to reflect on that as well. But I found that a helpful tip to keep in mind is that S, so specific actions, typically include action verbs, precise action verbs. So those could be like oversee, update, supervise, develop, plan, right? Things that are visualizable. I'm not sure that's a word, but you know what I mean. So you want to have those concrete verbs as opposed to the more abstract kind of verbs. And that can be helpful in terms of making sure it's concrete and rooted in things that are very tangible. Donc, vous pouvez vous inspirer de ces verbes-là pour vous aider à reformuler votre objectif. So we're going to be moving on to M, and M can be helpful as well for S. So they kind of go hand in hand, if you don't mind, Josh. Oh, wonderful. You read my mind. So M is measurable. So your goal should be measurable, and that's going to be very, very helpful in terms of tracking progress and staying motivated. Oh, by the way, I see we have a few questions coming up in the chat. So I'm going to be answering them at the end. But I see as this PowerPoint will be sent to us. That's a great question. We're actually going to have material on goal setting available on the wiki page for the Federal Youth Network. So you're going to be able to access a goal setting sheet there. That's going to be helpful. You can print it out and use it as a template. And it's going to have all of that information about the SMART acronym. Oh, that's lovely. Wow, Georgina, that is very specific. I love it. Wow. The Mist Station, that's looking amazing. Now I really want to see, I really see your exhibition now. So measurable. Thank you so much. So Marcella just dropped the link to the wiki in the chat. So you're going to be able to access the PowerPoint and the template I was discussing as well. It's all going to be on there. And you're going to be able to share with your colleagues as well if they weren't able to attend, but you feel they would benefit from having smarter goals. So measurable. That's going to be helpful in terms of tracking progress and staying motivated, because if you have no way of measuring how far along you've come, it's going to be a lot easier to become unmotivated because you're not going to be able to have that satisfaction of knowing that you're one step closer to reaching that goal, right? So you want to keep having those small bursts of dopamine, those small moments of acceleration of knowing like, oh, I've done it, like I'm progressing, right? You don't want to only save that joy and that celebration for when you reach the goal, because you're going to get discouraged along the way. You want to make sure you have those increments of progress that you can steadily measure and keep track of. And so that's going to be about reflecting on how much time, resources it's going to take. Is it going to be short term? Is it going to be longer term? And how will I know I've accomplished it? And this is a very important element that you might want to reflect upon, because if you don't know when you're going to have reached your goal, and that goes hand in hand with specific, as I was mentioning, you're not going to be able to have that celebration. So you really want to keep in mind that the brain is built to crave rewards. If you don't have built-in rewards, your brain is not going to want to do the effort of actually making changes to the momentum that you've built as part of your daily routine. So you want to make sure that you have a specific reason to deviate from your daily routine, knowing that's going to take time and effort, so that you feel that consistency and that determination to keep moving forwards. So kind of trying to use your brain, in a way that's going to be useful and relevant to you. So keeping in mind, you're going to need those small rewards, and you're going to want to be able to track your progress so that you can link them to rewards. So if we move on to the French slide, you're going to see those same questions, but in French. So for example, if my objective is to run a faster mile, right? Going back to the running example, so I want to be a bit faster. That is specific. That's not necessarily measurable. So for example, I might want to tell myself, instead of running a 7-minute mile, I'm going to run a 6-minute mile, and I'm going to be decreasing my time in 10-second increments. So every time my time drops by 10 seconds, I'm going to have a reason to celebrate. And then when I reach 6-minute miles, I'm going to have reached my goal, right? So you do want to make sure it's measurable like that. So losing weight is a great example, because then you have, right, pounds or any other quantity that you can use to kind of track your progress. Wanting a promotion is a bit harder to measure, right? So you might want to set those small measurable goals within that bigger goal for yourself. So maybe the first goal is having a conversation with your manager about your desire to be promoted. And then the second goal is going to be having that conversation with your manager and your manager's manager. And then the next step is going to be negotiating an offer, so that you have those set goals, in mind, and you know exactly when you've reached your objectives or your sub-objectives, as the case may be. So if you find that your objective is not measurable, I'm just going to ask you to lower your hand, and maybe you're going to want to take a few minutes here to think about how you could make it more measurable. So finding a set quantity you can use to really have that experience of tracking progress effectively. And as Marcella is mentioning in the chat, we have some templates you can use for that as well. You're going to be able to have a look at the wiki after the workshop. That's amazing, Margaret. I love it. And I see you've identified barriers as well, right? I wouldn't necessarily say laziness. I feel like it's a very human tendency not to want to work out. Our bodies are designed to save energy. So in a way, I feel like it's perfectly natural, but I get what you mean, right? Procrastination, maybe lack of motivation. Those are great barriers. And that brings me to a key piece as well. If you think in advance about what might be stopping you from achieving your goal, you're going to be able to develop what we call mitigation strategies. So you want to think about those in advance. Before you reach an obstacle, you want to be thinking about the potential obstacles you're likely to encounter and the way that you're going to go around them or overcome those obstacles. So for example, you might tell yourself, I want to work out. Maybe I want to work out for an hour, 5 days a week. I know that's going to be an issue because there's going to be this obstacle, this obstacle, this obstacle. Maybe one of those is lack of motivation. So how am I going to go around that? Well, maybe I'm going to have a workout partner, a workout buddy. And every time I decide I'm going to work out, I'm going to text them the morning of and tell them, hey, by the way, I'm going to work out at 4 today. And if I don't work out at 4 today, I have to buy you a beer. Or maybe, I have to buy you a healthy drink, a smoothie. But kind of finding that way, right? That could be one strategy, or it could be like at the end of the week, if I haven't reached my quota for the amount of times I did want to work out, I'm going to be I won't be going out with my friends. Yeah, that's not the best example, actually, because I don't want you to punish yourself. So I'm going to be wording that another way. If I haven't reached my quota by the end of the week, I'm going to have to help my family with landscaping. So there's another way to get moving, but at the same time, that might be keeping you from watching Netflix, for example. So you do have that element of having to kind of force yourself to get your body moving, but you don't have that punishment component. So do not keep yourself from going out with your friends. Oh, and Caroline is saying I need to use calendar to track my weight loss. That's a great idea. I will hang my favorite dress as my motivation. That is great. That's a great goal. Wonderful. So I see that you're all making a lot of progress in terms of making your goals ever more measurable and specific. So if we move on to A, attainable, achievable, attainable. So how can I accomplish this goal and how realistic is the goal? So an attainable goal is something that can be achieved, with your current skills and abilities. So you should be able to stretch yourself, right? It should be a bit of a challenge. It should still remain possible. So if your goal is to become the next president or prime minister, that might be a bit too much of a stretch. But if your goal is to become permanently employed within the public service, if you're a student, for example, that's a very attainable goal. So you do want to make sure to keep it realistic there. And when you set that achievable goal, you may be able to identify opportunities or resources that can bring you closer to it. So based on your existing experience, do you feel that you have the time to complete the required training you need, for example? Do you have resources available to you? Do you want to list those resources maybe so you can take advantage of them? Can you afford to do it financially and energetically? So going back to our running example, let's say it's going to be a lot of trouble for me to run a half marathon at this point in my life because I've never done it, right? So I don't have the endurance. What I'm going to do is first make sure that it's realistic, and it is realistic. Like I can run, for example, 15K. So I want to go for 15 to 21. How am I going to be doing that? Every week I'm going to run an additional K, right? An additional kilometer. And I'm going to be keeping myself accountable using some of those strategies I just discussed. So maybe texting a friend in the morning to let them know, or maybe, publishing it online on my Facebook page so that people can let me know if I haven't achieved my goal one week. They'll be like, hey, where's the post, right? And then I do want to make sure that 21K is achievable. So going from 15 to 21, maybe it's going to take me 6 weeks. So I'm going to go for 6 weeks plus 1 week as a cushion, 7 weeks, perfectly achievable, but still a challenge. If I were to say I want to go to the Olympics, the Tokyo Olympics, that would not be an achievable goal. So if you're not too sure whether your goal is achievable or enough of a challenge, you might want to run it by a friend or somebody you trust and ask them, do you feel that this is attainable for me? And that could give you a bit of insight. And you'll find often that friends and people we trust tend to push ourselves, right, a bit more than we would normally push ourselves. And I find that that's a great way to get motivated and to see how much people around us trust us to reach our objectives and how we can really do more than we might have thought we were capable of, right? We have such great potential. So don't feel shy about setting a challenging goal, but do make sure that you're not going to get discouraged, that it's going to be something that you can work towards in a sustainable way. So if we move on to the next slide, you're going to have those same questions in French. And if you find that your goal was not attainable, I'm just going to ask you to lower the hand that you've raised. Donc, si on parle d'un objectif atteignable, je pense que c'est la seule lettre du SMART, en fait, qui se conserve en français. Donc, encore une fois, à quel point est-ce que l'objectif est réaliste pour vous? Est-ce que c'est quelque chose qui convient à votre style de vie aussi? Est-ce qu'il va falloir que vous fassiez des sacrifices pour pouvoir faire du temps, donner de l'énergie à cet objectif-là? Ça vaut la peine de réfléchir à ça avant de vous lancer trop profondément dans un objectif qui pourrait mener à des effets négatifs. So Melanie is asking, is making contact with other departments? Yes, that could be a great sub-goal, right? So that could be one of the goals leading you towards your bigger goal of getting that promotion. You might want to make contact and network with other departments, other hiring managers. That's a great idea. Caroline is saying an hour exercise every day with my friends virtually. That's amazing. That's amazing. Every day is quite ambitious, I have to say, but if you feel you can do it, feel free. I'll be cheering you on. So if we move on to the next slide, and again, you might want to come back after the workshop to your goal and reflect a bit more on whether it's attainable and challenging enough for you. So relevant. this is a key question and one that we don't often ask ourselves, right? So at the beginning, when we're talking about the Est, the specific portion, one of the sub-questions was why? Why do you want to do this? And you might have found that thinking on that why might have led you to realize that maybe that goal isn't so much a goal that you want to keep on working towards. So this is a way, the R, the relevant piece, is a way to kind of reflect more deeply on that question. Is this goal worthwhile? Is it the right time in my life? So maybe I do want to do it, but not right now, right? Does this match my other efforts and needs? And am I the right person to reach this goal? Is this something that I want to reach? Or is it something that maybe somebody around me wants to reach? And so you do want to think about that before you get too deeply involved in accomplishing this goal. So you might find that there's a limited quantity of time and energy you have within a week, within any given week, any given month, any given period of time. And you want to make sure that you make judicious choices so that you can spend your time and energy in the ways that matter most to you. So if you settle on a goal, that means you're going to have less time and energy for other goals in your life and other priorities and areas of your life that you want to develop. And so you can make those strategic decisions at different times in your life, different periods, to focus a bit more on one specific area or another, keeping in mind that you can do it all, but just not all at the same time. So if you try to set yourself up to do everything at once, it's very likely that you'll end up overwhelmed. And we do want to be patient and compassionate with ourselves as well. Challenging ourselves is fun, but we should never be punishing ourselves if we don't achieve our goals. If we don't manage to accomplish a goal, then that is an opportunity to reflect on whether we really do want to accomplish what we set out to do, right? Do we really want to do it? Or did we maybe lose motivation because it wasn't necessarily in line with our values and dreams? And then if we did really want to accomplish the goal, but we've not been able to, why was that? What are the obstacles we can work on for next time? What are the lessons learned that we can work on to make sure that the next time we try, it's going to go better? And those are ways that we can keep ourselves motivated, even if we don't always accomplish what we set out to do. And don't be afraid to set challenging goals you may not be able to accomplish, because that's going to be a way to keep on pushing yourself and to keep on becoming better and better and more effective. And to know yourself better too. So if we move on to the next slide, we're going to have those same questions in French. Donc, est-ce que ça en vaut la peine? Est-ce que c'est un bon moment? Puis je vous invite vraiment à réfléchir à ça. Si on en revient, par exemple, à mon exemple de courir un demi-marathon, est-ce que ça en vaut la peine? Si personnellement, je pense que ça en vaut la peine pour moi. Pas nécessairement parce que je vais absolument courir 21 km, mais parce que courir un demi-marathon, c'est une manière pour moi de repousser mes limites physiques. C'est une manière pour moi de me sentir encore plus forte, plus vitale, plus vibrante dans mon corps. Donc, c'est des raisons qui vont un peu au-delà de l'objectif que je me suis fixé qui est très mesurable. C'est des raisons qui vont m'aider à rester motivée. Mais si pendant que je suis en train de travailler vers mon demi-marathon, je réalise que c'est pas le bon moment pour moi, j'ai plus l'énergie pour faire mes autres workouts, par exemple, ça peut être un signe que j'ai besoin de repousser mon objectif ou de le modifier pour me permettre de prendre plus de temps pour l'accomplir. So you might want to use that introspection, that self-reflection to kind of adjust your objective and your timeline as you go as well. So if you find that the objective is no longer realistic as you're progressing, you might want to adjust that. Objectives are not set in stone, so you can always be flexible with them within reason. That's amazing, Carolyn. That's a great why. So if we move on to the next slide, timely or time-bound. So questions to consider when developing your goal. When? And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, when we were talking about the when for the Est, the specific portion, you might want to set first that goal in time and then work backwards from your bigger overarching goal so that you can set smaller sub-goals, measurable sub-goals, and have those be set in time as well, right? So that you can make sure it's realistic as well. So kind of joining all of the letters together here. So what can I do, for example, 3 months from now? What can I do 4 weeks from now, in a month? What can I do right now? Are those all realistic, measurable, and achievable? And then once you have that timeline in place, you can follow it and you don't have to think about what you need to do. It doesn't feel like this big, overwhelming puzzle piece anymore because you have all of those tiny steps clearly defined for you and you can just kind of go ahead and do them, right? So it's going to take a lot of mental effort to design your plan for the goal. But once you have it in place, you don't have to work with that mental load anymore. You don't have to live with that energy drain of trying to figure out what your next step is going to be. You can just kind of let yourself go with what you've already decided. So I would highly recommend working out that timeline, keeping in mind also that you can always adjust. And you want to make sure the timeline is, again, challenging, but not unrealistic. And depending on what else you have going on in your life, you would want to make it more or less challenging as well, right? If you have a lot of other areas of your life that are demanding attention and time and effort, you might want to make it a bit of a more generous timeline so that you can make sure that you have all of your energy available to focus on the goal when you do have time for it. And conversely, if you find you're at a bit of a more relaxed place in the rest of your life and you have a lot of energy to spend working on your goal, then you might want to make it a bit more challenging, a bit more ambitious. So if you find that your objective was not time-bound, I'm just going to ask you to lower your hand at this point. Oh, 11 hands. That's pretty good. That's pretty good, guys. 12. Nice, nice. Oh, I'm proud. That's a great number. I was kind of expecting there to be like one hand left. So if we move on to the next slide, we're going to have, again, those same questions in French. So going back to my running example, as I've said, I might set myself a 7-week timeline, and every week I'm going to be increasing my running distance by 1K, and I'm also going to be decreasing my running speed by 10 seconds for a mile. So I'm going to have both those objectives within a week. And that could be very achievable if I go run 3 times a week, for example. To lose 20 pounds by Christmas, wow. That's very achievable as well. Because you do have, I believe, 7 or 8 months. And then you can also readjust, of course, as we go. Donc, vous pouvez prendre un peu de temps pour réfléchir à ça. So this is already the end of the acronym. And I'd just like to congratulate all of you for taking the time to reflect on a goal. And I would like to encourage you as well to go back to your goal at the end of this workshop and to reflect on it some more once you have, a bit more time and quiet space to yourself, and just kind of take all of those pieces of knowledge that we've been discussing and incorporate them into your objective, into your strategy. Feel free, if you'd like, to share as well what your final goal looks like in the chat, if you've already been able to kind of work it over a bit, if it's different from what you came up with at the very beginning of this workshop. And we'll all be very happy to cheer you on. We're going to be moving on to some specific examples quickly, and then we're going to have a bit of time for questions. So if there's any questions that you would like to ask in preparation for that, feel free to write them down in the Q&A section or the chat. That's a great idea, Georgina. Yeah. To-do list, action plan, that's great. And then setting time expectations, right, for each step of the action plan. If you do have to work with other people, you might also want to consult them first before you set timelines, because they might have their own goals and timelines, but that can be a nice way to collaborate as well. Agreeing together on an action plan. So let's say the goal is I want to improve my performance. So that is big. We know there's no specificity to it now that we know the SMART acronym. There's no timeline. There's no way to keep you motivated. So we're going to keep working on that goal together as we go through the slides, the next few slides, and we're going to see how that goal kind of becomes enriched, right? Improved and enhanced as a result of working through the SMART acronym together. So if we move to the next slide, we're going to make that very vague goal specific. So you have that same specific goal in French and English. So what does it mean when we say I want to improve my performance? Maybe it's in relationship to our use of a specific software program that we find we have trouble with. So in this case, we made this more specific by saying I received some low marks in my ability to use PowerPoint at my last performance review. So I was speaking with my manager and she mentioned, that my PowerPoint skills could use some work. So to improve my skills, I need to learn how to use PowerPoint effectively and practice it by creating different presentations that are in line with what I might be expected to create as part of my job, and maybe the next job I'm hoping to get as well, right? So I'd like to be more proficient using PowerPoint in time for my next review in 6 months. Donc, on voit que c'est très spécifique ici. We can see that it's very specific. et c'est relié à un objectif spécifique. Donc, au lieu de se demander comment je peux devenir meilleur au travail de manière très vague, on a vraiment un objectif qu'on peut visualiser clairement, nous qui utilisons PowerPoint. So if we move on to the next slide, we're going to be making this objective measurable as well. So how do I make this specific example measurable? And if your example is not specific, you might find it's very hard to measure it as well. So as I've mentioned before, those two are really connected. But let's say by the time of my next review, I should be able to create presentations that incorporate graphs, images, other media in a couple of hours. So I want to be able to make something that has multiple formats of images and shapes within 2 hours. I should also be able to effectively use and create templates in PowerPoint that my coworkers are going to be able to use. So as you've seen, those are sub-goals, right? So you have the sub-goal of creating presentations that incorporate graphs and images, and you have the sub-goal of being able to create templates that can be shared effectively. So those would be those two main sub-goals that you want to reach by the time of your next performance review. Donc, des exemples qui sont très mesurables. Comme vous voyez, ce n'est pas obligé d'être des chiffres purs et durs. It doesn't have to be hard numbers, always. It does have to be measurable in the sense that you're going to know exactly when you've achieved it. Donc, vous voulez vous assurer que c'est quelque chose que vous allez pouvoir reconnaître une fois que vous en êtes rendu. So if we move to the next slide, we're going to be moving on to the A. Is it achievable? And then going back to the why as well, right? The reason behind this decision. So improving my skills, for example, is going to help me move forward in my career. And so I can set time aside every week to watch PowerPoint tutorials, so giving myself resources here, and even enroll in an online class that can teach me new skills. And I can also ask coworkers and my manager for PowerPoint tips. So those are all strategies to reach your goals that make those goals more achievable. And then another thing I might have added there is maybe I'm going to ask my manager for time set aside every week to help me work on those skills so that my manager is helping me protect the designated time in my calendar. And I'm going to block off periods of time in my calendar every week so that I don't have any excuse not to work on it. Nobody's going to book me in meetings. So those could all be ways to make it more achievable. Donc, pour vous assurer que c'est atteignable. Vous voulez vous assurer que c'est des moyens aussi, des stratégies que vous allez pouvoir mettre en place sans que ça vous demande trop d'efforts ou d'énergie. Donc, si votre objectif, oui, est atteignable, mais que vous devez dépenser énormément d'énergie pour le rendre atteignable, c'est peut-être pas le bon moment aussi. Puis on en revient à l'idée du R. Est-ce que c'est réaliste? Est-ce que vous avez l'énergie pour mettre en place les stratégies sur lesquelles vous vous êtes entendu pour rendre l'objectif atteignable? So you want to make sure you have the energy to put in place those mitigation strategies in the first place, right? Otherwise, it's maybe not the best timing. Speaking of timing, moving on to the realistic part. So the next slide, is it relevant and realistic? In this case, let's say working with PowerPoint is about 25% of my job, but for the next job I'm looking towards, I'm going to need about 50% of my time to be spent on creating presentations. And I happen to like my job. I happen to want to grow within the company. So in this case, very relevant. And is it realistic? Yes, it is realistic because I've set in place those mitigation strategies to make it more achievable, and I have the support of my manager. And I know my coworkers would very much appreciate working with my templates. So in this case, both relevant and realistic. Vous pouvez faire la même démarche avec l'objectif que vous êtes mis en place. Donc, vous assurez d'avoir le support de votre entourage aussi, making sure you have the support of the people around you, especially those who will be interacting with you relating to the specific area of your life that you've set a goal in. That's going to be key as well in making it realistic. Donc, vous assurez que vous avez le support des gens qui vous entourent. Et finalement, si on s'en va au dernier objectif, le T. So, moving on to the next slide for time-bound, temporel. In 6 months, so as you might remember, that was the objective we set under the S letter. I should be proficient in PowerPoint, ensuring it only occupies 25% of my workload, so I don't spend too much time on it. And again, going back to this idea of time-bound goals, I'm going to be able to do a complex PowerPoint within 2 hours by that stage. And so that's going to allow me to spend more time working on, for example, making new contacts within the organization, learning new skills as well outside of PowerPoint, learning more about what my colleagues are working on, and so on and so forth. And so I've set that time limit. But now I'm going to take that 6-month time period, and I'm going to work backwards from it to determine when I should be able to do what, right? So I'm going to take my calendar, and I'm going to say every week I'm going to take this class for 2 hours. Every week I'm going to practice on my own for an hour, and that's going to be time blocked off in my calendar with the support of my manager. And so by the time I hit 2 months, of practice, of continuous practice, I should be able to create simple templates using only graphs. And then in 4 months, I'm going to be doing graphs and images, and so on and so forth. And then you can reevaluate as you reach those milestones. So there's that. We've been already moving through the whole acronym. I hope this was helpful to you. So if we move on to the next slide, you're going to see what it looks like all put together again with the PowerPoint example. I want to improve my performance. How do we make that smart? To grow in my career, I need to improve my PowerPoint skills. By taking online classes and reviewing tutorials, I'll improve my skills so that it only requires 25% of my work time. My milestone is to complete the course online in 3 months. In 4 months, I'm going to be able to do a complex PowerPoint with animated images. In 6 months, I'm going to be able to do that in under 2 hours. And my deadline is going to be my next employee review, and I'm going to have that time set aside. I'm going to have all of those mitigation strategies in place. My calendar is booked with those different milestones. I'm ready to go. And maybe at that point, I want to think of ways to reward myself as I hit those milestones as well. So there you have it. And of course, maybe your own goal is going to look different. I assume not all of you want to get proficient in PowerPoint, but this can be kind of a nice way to think about it in terms of structuring your goal. And if we move to the next slide, you're going to see that a lot of the verbs in there are concrete action verbs, as we were saying when we looked at the letter S, right? So growing in my career, that relates back to the why. Why do I want to do this? So I can improve in my career, improve my PowerPoint skills, 25% of my work time. So measurable, concrete and measurable. 3 months, time bound. 6 months, the end of my objective. Then I'm going to know I'm going to be done in 6 months. So I don't have to keep that motivation going forever, right? I know there's an end in sight. And so you have those very important components that have to be in there. You need to have that measurable objective. You need to make sure it's specific and concrete. You need to make sure you have mitigation strategies in place, and you need to make sure it relates to your why, your main key reason. So once you have those in, you're golden. You know, you may not reach your objective in the timeline that you've set, and maybe along the way you're going to realize that maybe this objective was not for you, and that does happen, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. But you're going to have set yourself up for success, and you're going to have made sure that you're equipped with the tools and resources that you need to reach your objective effectively. And you can be proud of that. Regardless of whether you meet your objective or not, you can be proud of making sure that you're going to have the best possible chance of making it. Et je vous encourage vraiment à essayer d'atteindre vos objectifs. C'était tellement beau à voir là, quand vous échangez dans le chat par rapport à ce que vous aimeriez faire. Il y a tellement une belle diversité d'objectifs. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what all of you are going to be able to accomplish over the summer and the next 6 months. So if we move on to the next slide, we're going to just see the same slide in French. And so you have that same idea here of highlighting the keywords that link back to that SMART acronym. Donc, je réalise que SMART, ça ne marche pas trop comme acronyme en français, mais ça peut être pratique là, pour vous souvenir des 5 lettres. C'est un petit peu moins beau l'acronyme français. Donc, je vous invite à tirer profit des informations qu'on a apprises aujourd'hui pour réfléchir un petit peu plus à vos objectifs, peut-être considérer des éléments aussi de ce dont on a discuté quand vous mettrez sur place vos prochains objectifs de carrière, vos prochains objectifs personnels, et ainsi de suite. Moving on to the next slide, I'd like to know, what is your main takeaway from today's segment? Donc, quelle est votre principale leçon apprise aujourd'hui? If you feel comfortable sharing it in the chat, I'd love to see it. And I'm curious to know if you've all, kind of inferred similar takeaways, or if different elements have been helpful to different people, to all of you differently, depending on your objectives and your timelines and where you're at in your careers as well. And of course, if you have any feedback about the workshop, feel free to email Marcella, to email Finn, so the Federal Youth Network. We're always looking forward to hearing more about your ideas and how we can improve for next time and make those workshops more and more accessible, more and more helpful and insightful for all of you. Thank you so much, Georgina. So feel free to share. Be more detailed when setting goals. I like that. Making them broad keeps you distance from it. Yeah, exactly. And I do find that having broad and vague goals makes them a bit less easy to imagine. And it doesn't make you as motivated to reach them, because then you're not really sure what it's going to look like. Planning steps, that's great. Yeah, I love planning myself. I'm not much of a planner by nature, so I have to force myself to do it, but I'm always very satisfied when I have planned something. Makes it so much less of an effort, day to day, because I know exactly what I have to do. Oh, thank you, Jenny. Oui, constant dans nos actions, exactement. Donc, souvent, on a cette idée qu'il faut donner un gros coup au début, mais c'est pas nécessairement quelque chose qu'on peut maintenir dans le temps. So you might feel like you have to kind of give it your all, right? But if you give something your all in the first few weeks, you might kind of run out of gas as you move forwards. So having small, consistent sub-goals is going to be a lot more effective than going like 100% over the first few days and then not having the energy to keep on going forward. Donc, vous voulez vous assurer que vous êtes équilibré dans votre approche aussi. Yes, making sure my goals are something I want before committing, absolutely. Especially because once we've committed to a goal, we kind of feel like we need to do it, right? Like we have to keep on pushing forwards. We might feel that people are going to judge us if we don't go forwards. And I absolutely understand that. I would encourage you to keep on reevaluating your goals as you move alongside your plan, as you move along your timeline, and make sure it's still something you want as well. Because you might find that a lot of what you've set towards reaching one goal can easily be redistributed or redirected towards reaching another goal that's going to be a better fit for you as well. So I would encourage you not to get too emotionally attached to one goal. Depending on your why, it might be that the why is something extremely meaningful. I know some of you have shared some personal reasons behind your decisions and goals today, and I absolutely respect that. And if that's the case, then by all means, I encourage you to keep on moving forward wholeheartedly. But if you find that your goal is maybe something that was a bit less connected to a meaningful why for you, then by all means, don't feel any obligation to keep on going. Wonderful. Be consistent, be determined. Yes. Give me the idea to analyze what I like to do. I love it. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Oh, Nicole saying I plan maybe a little too much. I feel like we should work together, Nicole. There'd be a good balance between us. Absolutely. So some of us might be over planners as well, in which case, you can kind of get that planning piece out of the way first, and then you can just kind of go with the flow for the rest of the goal setting experience. Mais merci beaucoup à tout le monde. Thank you all so much for coming today. I really appreciate your participation, your engagement. It's really been an amazing experience interacting with you all, and I really hope you're going to be able to accomplish your goals. It's so encouraging to see all of you sharing. Thank you for joining us today. And if you enjoyed the experience today, if you'd like to know more about different topics related to public service basics, feel free to register for next month's segments. So every Tuesday, there's going to be a different workshop on a different topic. So Marcella is going to be dropping the link in the chat if you'd like to have a look at the upcoming topics. There's going to be a lot of interesting activities coming up. Donc, gênez-vous pas, si vous aimeriez participer à d'autres événements, il va y en avoir des vraiment intéressants qui s'en viennent au courant de l'été. And a lot of our summer workshops are going to be also specifically discussing topics that are going to be relevant to students. So for those of you starting out in your careers at the public service, you might find those relevant to your daily experience at work. Oh, thank you all so much. Merci beaucoup. Reading through your messages in the chat. That's so kind of you all. Thank you. Always a pleasure to work with you as well, to work with all of you, and to work with Marcella and Josh as well. So shout out to Marcella and Josh for making those events possible and working tirelessly on weekly programming. That's not always easy to manage.